welcome to the Trent England Show this Wednesday morning. Thanks for watching. We've got a lot to talk about this morning. Oklahoma's top politicians, that would be the candidates running for governor this year, are weighing in on a teacher strike. And what they have to say is interesting, partly interesting for its uniformity and partly interesting for what they don't say. We're going to get to that. Also, the governor, the current governor, Mary Fallin, has announced an application to the Trump administration that is very likely to be granted for a work requirement in the state's Medicaid program. We're going to talk about that, but also talk about there's one obvious thing. We've talked about it on the show before, but the most obvious thing that Oklahoma should do to just bring some honesty, bring some accountability to our state's Medicaid program. This is eating the state budget. The state spends over $2 billion a year on this. Another $3+ billion come in from the federal government. Medicaid is the big enchilada. If you want more money for teacher pay, if you want more money for public employee pay, if you want more money for anything else in the state budget, you should be looking at Medicaid. Serious people look at Medicaid. If they're not serious, they just sit around talking about tax increases. This is under fire. This good government effort is under fire at the state legislature, and there are actually legislators, I just find this mind-blowing, who are taking the word of bureaucrats at the Oklahoma Health Care Authority. These are the people who have gotten the state into the current budget mess. The only reason why the state has a shortfall going into the next budget, the only reason, is because of the incompetence and possible illegality of people at the Oklahoma Health Care Authority. That's why I've titled the show today, Fool Me Twice, I Must Be a State Legislator. How dumb are these people to be fooled over and over again by the same group of bureaucrats who they know have lied to them? We're going to get to that in just a minute. Primary season has kicked off in earnest with Texas voters voting yesterday. I just love the fact, I got this from The Hill, I just love the fact that some of the mainstream media is out there trumpeting high turnout among Democratic voters. Is Texas going to turn blue? Is Texas going to turn blue? You know, frankly, a lot of Republicans are out there saying Texas could turn blue because it's a good turnout strategy for Republican voters. But even with Democrat turnout being way up, this goes to something that I've pointed out on the program before that seems like it gets missed in most of the reporting on the election this year. Sure, Democrat turnout in Texas was up. They also have more candidates running than they often do on the Democrat side this year. We've talked about that in the past. More of these primary candidates have funding. They can run campaigns. They can get people out to vote. None of this is totally organic, or at least organic on election day. I mean, a lot of this relates to things that have happened over the last few months, things that are very predictable. But even with all of that, about 3/5 of the electorate turning out in Texas was Republican. And look, Republican is a state that's been consistently red, but not really for that long, at least not if you're as old as I am or older. And Texas is a state where, you don't have to go back very far to see legitimate claims that maybe Texas was going to go purple. Maybe Democrats were going to flip back some seats in Texas. And here's what I've told you in the past, and here's what I'm going to say again about all this. Democrats do better in presidential election years. Part of that is ideology. Part of that is, these tend to be people on the left who really believe in big government. The bigger, the better. And they tend to believe in executive government. National Review actually has an essay on this in the current issue of their magazine. The left has gradually coalesced around the idea of big executive-run government. And so the presidency gets their people out for ideological reasons. It is also well known that, that Democrats tend to rely on a lot of, I don't want to use the phrase low information voters, that's obviously pejorative, but on a lot of people who are not tuned into politics at all, right? And so they have a turnout machine, but it's an expensive turnout machine to run. It can be very effective at the national level when they turn it on, but they tend to do that best in presidential years. So both for ideological reasons and for just basic political process reasons, Democrats tend to see much higher turnout in presidential years. And the inverse of that is Republicans tend to do better in off-year elections. And this is why an off-year wave election for Democrats is harder than an off-year wave election is for Republicans. And any credible political scientist, anybody who really looks at this stuff over time, will acknowledge that that is true. That's been the trend over the last 20 or so years, certainly since 1994. I used to live in a legislative district, by the way, in another state. I lived in a legislative district that for a while was, at least for one legislator, was going Republican in every off year and Democrat in every presidential year, back and forth for almost a decade, right? So I have seen how this works close up and personal. And so look, I mean, you know, Democrat turnout way up in Texas in yesterday's primary, and it was about 40-some% of the electorate. Right, not enough to win any statewide elections. Look, I don't say that to I don't say that to, you know, I don't want people resting on their laurels on the conservative side of things. I just say that because it's true. Okay, a little bit of news out of Washington, D.C. The Trump administration last night sued the state of California over its interference with immigration enforcement. It will be good to see that case move along, as I pointed out on the show in the past. Conservatives can't win. If you care about constitutional federalism, you can't lose. You can't lose in fights like this, I think, because look, you've got California out there waving the 10th Amendment flag, right? I mean, how long is it going to be before they start having left-wing rallies in California where they're waving Gadsden flags? Maybe they'll even borrow the flag from Texas, the come and take it flag, right? I mean, you've got liberals in California arguing for states' rights. We'll see what happens in court. I'm not even gonna venture a guess on all of that. Meanwhile, Gary Cohn, top Trump economic advisor Gary Cohn, announced yesterday he's leaving the administration after disagreeing with the president on tariffs. Gary Cohn is right. The president is wrong. Tariffs are a terrible trade policy. We've talked about this on the show in the past. You see the stock market going down because of this announcement on tariffs. Job numbers are going to be that's going to be the big economic news for Gary Cohn leaving and the market going down is going to be up there too. But the top headline right now is job numbers are really good. Remember, those are preliminary numbers. They always get modified, but also that is data with a lag time, right? All of those jobs were created before the Trump administration announced that it is dabbling with the idea of starting a trade war. And whatever they say about, you know, I guess the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is out there this morning saying, we're not trying to start a trade war. Well, look, across the board, 25% tariffs on imported steel, them's fighting words. And look, you know, in case you haven't followed this, here's how this works. When the U.S. does this to other countries strike back, but it's not about metals because they're not importing a lot of metals from us. What are they importing from us? They import a lot of agricultural goods, right? This is something that has farmers in Oklahoma and a lot of other places in Middle America very, very nervous. And the president should not miss the fact that, yes, he won thanks to the Rust Belt, but he also won because he already had the support of a lot of very agriculture-dependent states, and the president, if he's not careful, is going to be gouging rural Oklahoma and really hurting people in places like Iowa and, well, you know, just across the Midwest. So that's where things are today. No, there is some sense that they're going to back off on this, but who knows? When you're dealing with the current administration, very hard to say. You know, it's also very telling. I mean, who's really happy about this? The Bernie bros are really happy about this. They want the federal government more involved in the economy. They believe that presidents should be able to, you know, control the commanding heights and tinker with the economy and things like tariffs. I mean, the only group that is unambiguously excited about these tariffs, I mean, other than very small groups of Americans who actually produce steel and aluminum. I mean, we talked about on the program when this news first broke, right? Very, very short list of winners. But the only people who are ideologically happy about this are the Bernie bros, the Bernie Sanders folks. That should tell us a lot. Okay, meanwhile, one more piece of news from outside of Oklahoma. I just have to report this because I had I had been asked by some folks in Tennessee to look at a proposal that was made by the mayor of Nashville, and I thought, wow, they have a crazy left-wing mayor of Nashville. Well, not anymore, not as of yesterday. She was supposed to be the great rising star for the left in the South, and in Tennessee, obviously, in particular. And she's out after pleading guilty to stealing public money. She was having an affair with her bodyguard, and he was charging the state overtime. I'm not going to say anything else about it. That's dangerous. This is a family show. I'm not going to say anything else about that. Good work if you can get it. I don't know. They both had to plead guilty, and they are both looking for new jobs. Okay. Right here in Oklahoma, we have teacher strike news. They have pushed back the date of the possible teacher strike to April 23rd. The Oklahoman carries this morning. I love this because it's, this stuff writes itself. It's so obvious, right? Oklahoma City School Board supports a teacher strike. Of course they do. We were just talking the other day about Tulsa and the fact that the school boards of Oklahoma's urban school districts, and you might not live in an urban school district, or you might live in an urban school district and your kids go to don't go to one of the public schools in that district. Maybe they're in a charter school, maybe they're homeschooled or whatever. But you have a lot. You have a lot at stake in these urban school districts in Oklahoma, because almost all of Oklahoma's kids, almost all of Oklahoma's future, is being educated in either the Oklahoma City Public School District or the Tulsa Public School District, right? That's where most of Oklahoma's kids are. And of course they support the teacher strike. They will do anything to distract from the failures that are going on in those school districts. And I do not say that with 1 ounce of glee, right? I mean, it is a disaster for Oklahoma's future that you have the 2 biggest school districts in the state that have a hard time figuring out how to teach kids to read. And I had a teacher's email got passed along to me earlier this week from inside one of these big urban school districts. And basically what it said, I might share more of the details with this with you later, but I've got to confirm that it's, I don't want to burn any sources out there. But basically this email said that for certain groups of students, teachers are not allowed to ever give them a failing grade. That's one of our major urban school districts here in Oklahoma. You can't ever, actually what the email said, it was more nefarious than that. It basically said, if you fail one of these students, we will punish you. We will make your life miserable. It was kind of a passive aggressive sent from administration headquarters to these teachers. That is the kind of garbage that teachers have to put up with. So the people who are actually pushing that garbage out to teachers and into classrooms, right, they are just overjoyed that they can have this big fight over teacher pay because it's a distraction from their own failures. So of course they're backing a teacher strike. No surprise there. Meanwhile, Oklahoma's top politicians, I mentioned this at the beginning of the program, Oklahoma's top politicians, those are the candidates for governor, are weighing in on a teacher strike. I just thought it was fascinating what they have to say. This is from the Oklahoman this morning as well. I'll run through this. Chris Castile story in the Oklahoman. Mick Cornett, they always start with Mick Cornett because the news pages of the Oklahoman have endorsed Mick Cornett, I think. Mick Cornett said, this isn't in the state's best interest, certainly not in the kids' best interest, but he says, I understand they're desperate at this point. You hear this over and over again. And look, I'm going to be a little bit contrarian here. I'm on record. I think that we should pay teachers more in Oklahoma. Okay, so I'm on record with that. But over and over again, you're going to hear these gubernatorial candidates talking about desperation. You hear all this doom and gloom rhetoric out there. I mean, look, I think we should pay teachers more. And I understand that a lot of teachers think they should be paid more. And we're all in agreement on that. But every teacher, I mean, what is it? It's March now, right? So we're getting late in the school year, but every teacher made a decision, I mean, what, 8 months ago or so, give or take, to come back for the new school year that started in August, right? every teacher in a public school out there made a decision to keep teaching. And a lot of people in public schools haven't been teaching that long. They made a decision to go into this. They knew what the pay scale was, right? Somebody was pointing this out to me the other day, saying, I mean, look, it's a little bit, I mean, it's understandable for people to say we should pay teachers more. It's understandable for teachers to say that they should be paid better. But to say I'm going to walk off the job when I knew the pay scale going into it, I mean, every teacher who started last August knew that it was very unlikely. I mean, given the lack of gubernatorial leadership and this effective gubernatorial leadership in the state of Oklahoma, I mean, obviously the governor talks a lot about teacher pay, but she has shown no ability to bring people together in the legislature, even though Republicans have supermajorities in both chambers, right? I mean, the governor is about the lamest of lame ducks. And so nobody went into the school year in August, nor did anybody come into this legislative session at the beginning of last month thinking that, you know, it was some kind of walk, that pay was going to go up for sure, and now that slipped, and now there's desperation, and people plan to spend money that now they're not getting. I mean, it's just not true. So, I mean, I'm just being a little bit contrarian there, because it's fascinating. You hear all these politicians saying the same thing, and it's funny how you get politicians to coalesce around things that aren't actually true. But they sound good, I guess. Let's see, what else do we have here? We have Gary Jones, of course, the current state auditor. He pointed out that the law says that Oklahoma should have an education budget in place by April 1st. That is what is actually in state statute, although I don't know if has that ever been abided by? Not for a long time, maybe never. He says it's a critical situation. If the legislature doesn't get it done, that's another failure on their part. That was Gary Jones' comment, as quoted in the Oklahoman story here. Kevin Stitt, Republican candidate for governor also from Tulsa, said, nobody wants a walkout, but I understand their frustration. Our state government has failed our kids, our teachers, and our schools. And then he goes into the doom and gloom story about 4-day school weeks and lowest paid teachers in the region. I mean, look, I'll say it one more time. It's just disappointing to see people buying into this. And I guess I get it. If you're running as an outside candidate, you're going to play up the doom and gloom stuff. But the 4-day school week, I mean, I hope he reads the Tulsa World story on 4-day school weeks. That is, the idea that 4-day school weeks are clearly bad for kids, the research shows that's wrong. And the anecdotal evidence from Oklahoma school districts shows that's wrong. And even the National Education Association acknowledges all that. Even the National Education Association, right, the National Teachers Union, even they say that the research on 4-day school weeks is mixed, right? So, I mean, everybody wants to drag Oklahoma down. Look, fine, but use data that actually makes sense. The 4-day school week thing is, it's not true. It's misleading the way that gets used all the time. Okay. Let's see, the story tells us that Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb declined to comment on this story here, the issue of teacher strikes. I'll say this, gubernatorial candidate Drew Edmondson actually said I mean, I like the fact that Gary Jones pointed out what the law says, and Drew Edmondson says, by law, teachers in Oklahoma are not allowed to strike. I read that, I thought, well, good for him. He actually laid that out there. Teachers not actually allowed to strike in Oklahoma, says Drew Edmondson, but then he says, but if they do, I will stand with them. So I don't know. Lawless Drew Edmondson, I guess. And then Gary Richardson, of course, somebody the other day said, well, he's not running as a Republican. No, he is running as a Republican this time. He ran as an independent in the past, but he's running as a Republican this time, trial lawyer from Tulsa. He said, and he's right, we have several options on the table to raise teacher pay without raising taxes. Said he believes lawmakers have time to head this off, and he made the appeal to teachers for the sake of children to avoid a strike, if at all possible. So there you go. I mean, basically, what can you take away from all that? I mean, because all the people quoted in that article they have pollsters, they have advisors, they have message people, they have people who are counseling them on what to say, how to deal with this hottest of hot issues right now in Oklahoma. And none of them are embracing the idea of a teacher strike. And for the very reason that I pointed out on Monday, when it actually happens, when you actually have a teacher strike, and I have lived in a school district where teachers went on strike, all the politics change. Leading up to it, everybody loves their teachers. Everybody's supportive of the teachers. And as soon as they actually shut down schools, especially more than for just a day or two, as soon as they actually shut down schools, a lot of parents start grumbling and a lot of teachers start grumbling. And one of the fascinating things about the threats of a strike right now is the Oklahoma Education Association is trying to step in and pretend like they're calling the shots. But a tiny minority of Oklahoma teachers actually have any affiliation with the Oklahoma Education Association at all. So all of this, the politics of a teacher strike in Oklahoma are not as clear as you might think from the news stories that are, I think, kind of playing this up in part just because it's a fun, if you're a journalist, it's a fun story to cover. There's good conflict, there's a good narrative there for journalists to write about. So there you go. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this. Medicaid is eating the state budget, right? The easiest way to give teachers a raise would be to get Medicaid spending under control. And if you go back and look at Oklahoma's state budget starting 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago, and you look at the big chunks of spending, look at what is growing, and look at what is pushing other things down. And you might say that Medicaid has its foot on the neck of education spending. Because the problem with Medicaid is that it's a federal-state partnership. It sounds so wonderful. Anytime you hear federal-state partnership, that should set off alarm bells that this is a program designed to deprive me as a citizen of my right to control my government, to have even a chance of controlling my government. Because the federal government says, well, we're going to set up this program, but you get to run it. But we get to define all the rules, but sometimes we'll give you a waiver, and sometimes we won't give you a waiver, but you get to run it. You, in the states, you get to be the fall guy. And if you don't want to participate, that's fine, but we're going to take all the money anyway, and we're not going to give the money back. And if you participate, we will match what you spend. So, and sometimes you just have to spend 10%. We'll give you 90%, which again sounds like a great deal. But why do they do that? Why not just leave the money in the state? Because if they run it through Washington, D.C., funnel it back, make the state spend some money, make the state run the program, then you get this phony baloney system of government where if you go to the state legislature and you say, I want to do something about Medicaid spending, you know what they'll say 9 times out of 10? That's a federal program. We can't do anything. If you go to the federal government, you say, I don't like the Medicaid program in Oklahoma, they'll say it's a state-run, state-administered. It is designed to deprive you of your say as a citizen. It is blatantly unconstitutional. I don't actually know anybody who defends the constitutionality of programs like that with a straight face other than government lawyers when they have to go to court. But that's almost another story. Governor Fallon, good for her, applying for a waiver to impose work requirements within the state's Medicaid program. This just makes sense. Medicaid was never intended when it was created to be a program for able-bodied working adults. Did you know that? It has been expanded and expanded over and over again. But at its inception, Medicaid was designed for people who could not work, who were very poor, people who were elderly, disabled, or children. Those are the 3 groups. You had to be elderly, disabled, or a child, and also very poor to qualify for Medicaid, right? And it has been expanded so that it now is an entitlement program for a lot of able-bodied adults, including in Oklahoma. Even without the Obamacare expansion, it is that in Oklahoma. And so work requirements for those able-bodied adults just make sense. One of the problems with all welfare programs is that they create a disincentive to work. So work requirements are a way to try to counteract some of that disincentive. So good for the governor. Trump administration is sure to agree to this if they actually do it right, although we might need to cross our fingers because ultimately all this relies on the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority. The Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, and I'm going to post this story today. This was a great story on Oklahoma Watch by Paul Monies that ran yesterday talking about the medical schools that have been funded by Medicaid. Now, you may have heard of this story. You probably heard of this story, but most of the coverage of this has left out all of the important facts, and Paul Monies broke a whole bunch of news on this yesterday because he actually obtained some government documents, right? So the story was, well, the federal government's being mean, and they're not giving us this Medicaid money that we've relied on to fund our teaching hospitals in Oklahoma. Now, anybody who knows anything about Medicaid is right away going to say, wait a second, Medicaid money to run teaching hospitals? That's not what the program is for. How could that be? And it turns out Oklahoma is in a group of states that had a waiver to use some Medicaid money to pay for health care for the needy at our teaching hospitals. So it was a way to subsidize teaching hospitals. But you know what? Oklahoma's costs for this program are astronomically higher than any other state. The federal government kept saying, we know this because of Paul Money's story yesterday, the federal government had been saying, well, wait a second, you don't have a waiver to do this anymore, so actually you're breaking the law, state of Oklahoma, and your costs are so high, it's pretty obvious that you're actually subsidizing bureaucracy. I mean, look, the Obama administration thought that Oklahoma was being lawless and wasteful. The Obama administration thought that Mary Fallon's executive branch and the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority was lawless and irresponsible with tax dollars. The Obama administration, I'm going to say that one more time, the Obama administration thought that the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority was ignoring the law and wasting tax dollars. And we now know, because of this story that broke yesterday, that there was this multi-year back and forth about all of this, and the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority kept it to themselves, didn't let the legislature know, right? I mean, wouldn't the responsible thing right away be to go to the people who actually write the state budget and say, hey, we've got this problem? Even as I say that, nobody expects that. Nobody expects responsibility from the people who run the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority. Nobody expects the people who run state agencies in Oklahoma, and this is sad, this is tragic. It is, as George W. Bush would say, the soft bigotry of low expectations. Nobody expects the people who run these agencies to be mindful of taxpayers, to be responsible with money. And then when you get people who run state agencies well, you feel like, man, these people are heroes. These people are going above and beyond because they're trying to balance their books, and they're actually transparent with the legislature and with the people of the state of Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Healthcare Authority kept all this to themselves, created all of this mess. They could not find the waiver that the state originally had, right? I mean, this important legal document that gave them spending authority for this money temporarily, they couldn't even find it. They didn't let anybody know, and the only reason today, as we stand here today, the only reason Oklahoma has a budget shortfall in the next fiscal year is because the legislature had to bail out the healthcare authority, bail out the teaching hospitals to the tune of over $100 million with money from next year. The Oklahoma Healthcare Authority is the only reason why even call them names, right? It is absolutely absurd that these people get away with it. I mean, at least the leadership of the health department, at least they're all gone, right? At least they all resigned in something like disgrace, right? The Oklahoma Healthcare Authority leadership is still in place, and they're up at the legislature. I want to leave you with this. This is a call to action for every citizen of Oklahoma. These people who mismanaged funds, broke the law, lied, at least by omission, lied to legislators. These people are up at the legislature, and their lobbyists are up at the legislature saying, don't pass legislation to audit the Medicaid rolls, because we already kind of do that. And it'd be really hard for us if you pass this. We'd have to, it might cost money, even though the legislation explicitly says you can only spend money that you recover, right? If they find people who shouldn't be on the Medicaid rolls, the state saves money, and the state can spend the money it saves on the audit. So to say that it's going to cost money is basically just a lie. But who's surprised by that? The only thing surprising about this, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I must be an Oklahoma state legislator. Because the only thing really surprising about this, are we surprised that they don't want more audits of their programs? Are we surprised that they don't want people looking over their shoulders? Of course not. But you have Oklahoma state legislators actually sitting down and taking these people seriously. Somebody sent me some of the things that are being passed around at the legislature right now from the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, saying, don't pass this legislation, trust us. And you have Republicans, it is not Democrats, leave the Democrats out of it. I mean, look, they're such a small, embattled minority. Why? Let's not pick on them, right? I mean, they're mostly, I think, against this, but who cares? It's irrelevant. They're irrelevant. Republican state legislators, people who ran as conservatives, are trying to stop this legislation that has already passed the House, it's passed the Senate, but with amendments. So it has to be reconciled, has to at least repass in the House to be sent to the governor. And you have Republican state legislators saying, well, the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority says we shouldn't do this. It is laughable and embarrassing that anybody would take them at their word for anything. So here's the mission. Here's what we can do. We've got to let our legislators know that they need to pass Medicaid audits. They all know what that means. Pass Medicaid audits, and look. I mean, why send anybody to the Oklahoma House of Representatives or the Oklahoma Senate unless they're willing to actually use that power? And the way they use that power is not by being the lapdogs of people who run state agencies. And this has nothing to do with the quality of people who run state agencies, good or bad, right? The reason why the House of Representatives has the power of the purse is because they're the closest state elected officials to us, and they're supposed to represent us by asking hard questions and not taking people's word for it. And if they take people's word for it, they are violating their oath. They are violating the very reason why the House of Representatives exists in the first place. It's an election year. This has been the Trent England Show. Thanks for watching. Subscribe on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. We're going to have a special live broadcast on our Facebook group. We have a new Facebook group for activists. It's called OCPA Patriots. You can join. You can search that up, OCPA Patriots. You can join that group. No politicians allowed. Sorry about that, but only for grassroots activists here in the state of Oklahoma who are dedicated to free markets and limited government and individual freedom. We're going to have a special live interview with a couple folks from the American Conservative Union who are in town today to give some awards to some legislators and also to talk about criminal justice reform. They're going to be here with me about 10:30 this morning. So if you're a member of our OCPA Patriots group, you can jump over there at 10:30 this morning and watch the video, or you can find it on the archive. You can subscribe on iTunes and listen to the podcast. If you're not a video person, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes or on SoundCloud. Thanks so much for watching the Trent England Show. I'll talk to you tomorrow.